Hi everyone, welcome to our last session for the joint Micro Focus and Turnkey Higher Education Conference. We hope you've enjoyed today's mini sessions. As we mentioned in each session, any questions that we didn't get to will be answered offline at the end of the conference. Hopefully you've found all of the sessions today useful. For this last session, we wanted to explore how identity fits into the wider cybersecurity conversation. And as we have done for the previous sessions, if you can put your questions in the chat window, we will try to answer them at the end or live. And if we don't get to them, we will take them offline. Also, we've had a few questions over the day around materials. All recordings will be shared along with the materials that you've seen as well. So for the last time today, I'm Chris Boyle. I've been your host and I'm the Director for Identity at Turnkey. And for this session, I'm joined with my co-host, Simon Person from our cybersecurity team, and Mick Rutherford from Micro Focus. So Mick, do you want to just do a
Hi, anybody that wasn't on the earlier sessions. I'm still Mick Rutherford. I'm still an identity and access management consultant for Micro Focus and the CyberRes team. And looking forward to presenting. If my voice is too boomy, let me know. I will move further away from the mic. Okay, Paul?
Brilliant. Cheers, Mick. Simon, I'm going to hand over to you now to give a brief introduction, then you can take it from here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. So yeah, hi everybody. I'm really glad to be presenting today on the anchor leg of this higher education conference. So yeah, as Chris already mentioned, I'm Simon Person, with an exceptionally grand job title, but don't let that get in the way of today's session. So I'm the Director of Operations for Turnkey. So as part of my role, I oversee all of the solutions that we offer to the marketplace and run the delivery function as well. So taking a little bit of a lead with Chris in the IAM space, I'm focus much more of my attention on the enterprise risk and the application and cybersecurity practices, really. So had a proper job once upon a time. So I was a security architect in the utility sector in the UK. I've also had some Big Four experience as well, having worked for Deloitte for a period of time. And I've been working for Turnkey for the past 13 years, joining as a solution practitioner and coming up in through the company ranks to become a director of operations, and spending a lot more of my time working on the business than in it. So hopefully I can give a good account as to credibility and take you through some of the integrated risk and technical digital cyber issues, and rely upon Mick and Chris's wonderful knowledge of IAM if we start floundering in that world. So I thought I'd start with just trying to unpick the complex challenge, which is more often than not technology at the outset, but it's not just a blank sheet of paper. Most of the organizations that we work with, higher education aside, are exceptionally complicated in their IT landscape. So combinations of competing different technologies, both in the application side of things, legacy applications, customized applications, some infrastructure challenges, some different platform devices, and some very different risk thresholds that mean that you're trying to combine all of that into a coherent security strategy. Now, what brings all of these sorts of things together is exactly the topic of identity. So to make any of these different boxes work on the screen, you need to have some sort of authentication and authorization to make it happen. Otherwise, you're just going to be sat there looking at the previously blank screen for a lot of your day. Now, as soon as you start adding identities or users or any kind of integration technologies into that, you're introducing risk to your business model. So we can start looking at those different risk areas. There's different aspects of what we want to control and challenge. And this is where we start seeing the importance of identity that's coming through across those cyber and technical digital risk challenges. Now, one little look at Google, one little look at the BBC website, one little look at any kind of information sources starts highlighting the changing need for an IT challenge. And we're starting to talk about cyber risk, security awareness, and actually how do we protect our information assets from those internal and external sources. Now, a lot of people then reach for that identity as a key source of control and a key understanding about who should have what and who needs to not have what they want to have. So we can walk through each and every one of those different black boxes at the bottom of the screen that I just kind of clicked through. But fundamentally, access control is the ubiquitous and consistent measure across it. So if somebody that you want to have access to all of these information assets can get hold of it, brilliant. That sounds like a great idea. But if you had a nefarious or a malicious actor who wanted to get into your estate and do something a little bit dodgy with it, if they can bypass all of those different access control gates, then you will have to try and stop them in some form. And they've already stolen a march on you because they know what they're going after and you don't know where they're attacking. So each and every element of these icons could be a potential access point into your networks, into your critical infrastructure assets, into your key systems of record. And that could be for just enjoyment's sake, to prove that they could do it, or it could be to cause malicious intent or damage. Now, in the higher education realm, we've got an even more important reason for this. You've got a much wider spread of attack surfaces, a different threat vector that's coming through because of the myriad of different applications that you've got. And you've also got a reason to protect yourselves even more. So with the unique way that the higher education systems works, with combinations of corporate funding, private equity funding, private company investment from business innovations, and you've also got direct student funding, you've got various different sources of regulations and controls that you need to point out. So that could be from a financial adherence point of view, it could be from just reputational damage, and it could be about protecting your IP to be able to safeguard future revenues in case you needed to. Now, all of that information will be sat there on those different information stacks. You've also got a very changing user base. You've got alumni, you've got affiliates, you've got students, and you've got staff, as well as the traditional supply chain. All of those users, all of those people will need some form of access into your environment. So how can you tell the good from the bad? And how do you know where to protect yourselves? So the way that we try to do that within Turnkey is to look at a common framework across business sectors, across different technology sets, and come up with the same sort of key questions about how do we want to do it. So the NIST framework is really quite ubiquitous. You can use that as a framework to structure your approach to cyber defense and to grade yourself as to whether you're doing the right things. And we also use it as an investment prioritization matrix as well, to see whether we've got enough controls or whether a control in one place is actually going to pay better returns than some of the others. But fundamentally, if we work through those 5 pillars, we can see how they pertain to identity, but also what they mean in terms of cyber resilience and how they can come together to protect what needs to be protected. So we start off with the identifier space, and I'm going to come onto those in a little bit more details, but the identifier is all about trying to work out what those threat vectors would be. Why would somebody try to attack you, and where would they come from if you're trying to be attacked? So a lot of that is external. You can't necessarily always understand exactly who's coming after you, but you can try. The protect space is a lot more about the operation controls within the organization, within the entities themselves, and what you are doing about it. So those are the measures that you can take to protect yourself from any harm that may befall you. Detect, if we actually understand that we are under attack, we are having those sorts of issues coming at us, and we can identify when something has happened to enable us to actually reduce the attack time, reduce the window of opportunity that a would-be attacker has got within the networks, within the critical applications, or within those data entities, and do something about it. Now, the do something about it is the respond. How do we respond to that threat? How do we respond to that risk? How do we respond to that incident? What do we do about it? Whether that's processes that we follow, technical activities that we perform, or just, I don't know, sit around, drink a coffee and hope that they don't do anything bad. And the final one, recover. How do we recover from that attack and see how do we protect our systems again and respond more appropriately to restoration? It's all about business continuity planning. Now, how does identity play in this? So in the identify space, we can look at identities based upon the advanced persistent threats. Who are the likely people who are going to be attacking us? How are they going to get in? What are they going to do? And what's their usual mode of operation. We can start adding a persona onto those sorts of threats and really working out what they're going to do about it. We can start looking at protections in place. Do we have an identity management solution in place, such as some of those offered by Micro Focus, our sponsors here today? Do we have the right processes and principles in place? For example, least privilege, random access, malware checking. Do we have it about any time somebody's looking to go into a different application that it's automatically triggering malware scans? Do we have those kind of controls in place? Can we detect when things are going on? Can we monitor our networks, understand traditional use cases for when a user is connecting, and look at those outliers to see when it's a little bit suspicious? Can we respond correctly using the people, the processes, and the technology to actually respond? And how can we recover using the right credentials in the right place to actually perform the good activities there? So we'll come on to some of those in a little bit more detail. Hopefully I haven't lost you all already. So in the identify space, we are looking at trying to understand those advanced persistent threats. How do we know who is attacking us and why? So a lot of that's about discovery of our own environment. So we can look at what access do users currently have to the applications. Are there any applications or systems, servers, technology sets that aren't being used? Do we have coherence over which users are involved in which processes, and do we understand what they need to do those jobs? So key indicator of poor identity management is I don't know who my users are. I've got no idea who's a current student versus who's left 4 years ago, yet still got a student card, such as Mr. Boyle. Do we have advanced joiners, movers, leavers process with right-sized authorizations to do what they need to do? And do we know that that's contemporary, up-to-date, and still valid? So from that, we can work out if somebody did attack, what would they likely be able to compromise? Could we have applications that have been targeted where we have no operating controls, but we also don't know which users are likely to be in scope? So we can't then look and see whether they have been compromised, and we don't have any coherence as to whether that's in place or not. So it's all about discovery, understanding what do we have in our information area, and then applying that to what would be attackers looking for. Coming into the protect space. So as the title says, this pillar is focusing on the protection of assets. So in that regard, we are managing those risks. We are implementing appropriate controls into our organizations so that we can see how things are protected, and we can check and validate that they are being protected. So again, we come back to that identity management database. Do we have up-to-date user lists? Do we know what those users should be doing as part of their day-to-day lives? Do we know how to detect outliers? So those suspicious patterns. If somebody has been working for the past 18 years in the university and they've always had a little bit of a drop-off on a Friday afternoon, yet suddenly 6 p.m. on a Friday, that same user ID is being logged in and looks like they're doing a whole load of work, we could say, brilliant, after 18 years, they've had a change of heart and they've become technically diligent employees. Or we could say, it looks like somebody's taken over that ID and is using it at a slightly odd time. Just saying, not casting aspersions, but you can look at those patterns and you can try and find out how that's being manipulated. But it's also looking at all of those kind of controls over joiners, movers, leavers, and also learning management. If you've got policy statements that you're saying that you're training people, you can focus those by understanding who's actually passed the exams, who's got those accreditations on their records, who's actually signed off and done what they needed to in terms of policies and Delta quizzes if you need to. So all about the understanding and the proactive nature of what you can do to improve the visibility, transparency, and accuracy of your user information. And that doesn't just stop with employees. You can roll that out to anybody who may access your networks, particularly around security awareness. You can train your suppliers. You can ask them to sign up to supplier code of conducts. You can issue out mandatory security awareness training, cyber resilience training. You can do whatever you like to do. And particularly where you've got highly motivated individuals, or you've got low barriers of entry in terms of access to your networks or access to your assets. If you've got a massive student base, those are more likely to be the attack vectors that people could come through and compromise. And how are you going to detect if a student has now started to do something that you don't want them to do, or is trying to manipulate your systems of record, or trying to get hold of your intellectual property? So you can put a lot of controls in, and if you've got an advanced understanding of who your user community is and what they need, you can actually right size those controls to the areas of risk that you really want to protect. Detection. So this is all about monitoring, really. It's planning for those scenarios where your controls may fail. It's effectively recognizing that you're either not been attacked yet. Well, let's change that. You've either been identified as having had a positive attack, or you're likely to get one in the next 6 months. So planning for when things don't go quite to plan. And the way to manage that is to actually have that information and being able to detect those suspicious behaviors. So we go back to the 9 to 5er or the 9 to 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Again, understanding if you've got those monitoring softwares to really get into the detail and understand that that's a non-traditional use of that identity. You could apply that to any other types of things. If you've got students who generally just check an email once in a while, or they submit an assignment, but suddenly you see their names or their credentials popping up in different areas of your network. Why would they be there? Could be that they're doing something legitimate, but if it's an unusual thing, it could be suspicious and they could be trying to do something deliberate. So about timely detection of a potential breach or a potential suspicious element of behavior. And again, tooling in place from the Micro Focus suite that can help you to detect that. Now, if it does go horribly wrong and you get or detect a breach, you need to know what to do about it. So again, that could be a technical response to say, can we shut down the attack? Can we block it? Can we stop it where it sits? Do we have to re-architect all of the networks to try and segregate it and make sure that we've got isolationist principles or zero trust put in? Well, not necessarily. It could just be an understanding about the user that may have been compromised and an appreciation that that user hasn't got any privileged access or can't access those other things because these different controls are in place, such as that read access malware controls, or that they're just a normal user that can only have limited read access to non-GDPR relevant information. So we can respond appropriately to understand what the actual risk is and quantify that incident. Now, if it is a game over type, everything is compromised and everything is completely destroyed, we then have a very different response protocol. And that may well become part of a recovery incident. So it could well be that we do have to do restoration. We have to recover from backups, or we have to just rebuild servers, rebuild applications, or rebuild whatever else we want to do. Again, it links to the protect side of things. We have to look at those controls to work out, well, what is the severity of this and how do we want to take that forward? Do we have the encryption keys that we need to be able to release all of that data, whether it's from our own encryption or whether it's from a potential ransomware attack? But recovery could take very different approaches depending on the severity or the impact of the actual risk incident. So we would still need to plan for that. We will still need to have people on the inside who are actually working on those recovery processes, and that comes with identity management. So we still need to be able to permit people who can do the work on the recovery, whilst not necessarily adding everybody back into that, which would repeat the same problem that we had and introduce that compromise back into our recovered systems. Normally in a recovery side of things, there's a focus on service recovery and actually putting the functional requirement first, but we need to not forget about the fact that that should actually trigger improvements in the authentication scenarios. It should also start looking at how can we improve the security of that particular model, Because if there is a known vulnerability that has already been exploited, it's a fair chance that somebody somewhere is going to have another go and just to see whether they can repeat the same disruption. So good practice to start thinking about how do we improve those authentication controls? How do we improve some of the other protect elements that stops it happening again? So we come back to that core really of the NIST framework and the fact that identity is hugely important across the whole of it, particularly with that risk vector of higher education, the sensitivity of data that you hold, the transient nature of the people who are accessing your environments, and the criticality of what they could be doing for reputational damage to the institution and or financial gains that could be befalling them with all of the different known and unknown parties that are part of your funding models, means that you have got a particularly unique threat that's coming at you. If you take a coherent approach for that, there are always ways that you can help, but you don't necessarily have to invest in all of those 5 pillars evenly. You have to weight it to your own risk vectors, understand your own attack surfaces, and put in place the right size controls that will meet your needs when you need them. So that's what we would advise. It's a much more pragmatic approach, recognizing the threat, understanding what that means to you, seeing where those protection elements can be improved, but also trying to get a little bit out in front and recognize the fact that the identity space will actually help you to do that and shortcut a lot of the issues that you see later on. So that's the scaremongering pitch. What I would like to do is invite Mick into the conversation that shows how the different technology sets that we've got to offer can perhaps shortcut that even further and start to move us through into solutioning. But just before I do, I wondered whether I should pause for questions or pause for thoughts from the group to see whether there's anything that you wanted me to repeat or focus in on.
From my perspective, Simon, that's a great broad overview of the NIST framework, which I see as a fantastic checklist. It's a great method for jogging the memory that there's more to this than a single point solution that you need to consider. Identity is the cornerstone. It enables you to understand, first of all, what you're protecting. It allows you to see what is being protected on whose behalf, who your good guys are, who potentially could be considered a bad operator. But understanding what you've got, what good looks like, and how to protect it is the absolute starting point. As you say, it's a very, very broad area.
Indeed, I'm trying to right size this to a particular industry vertical when it's such a big topic and could go anywhere. It's quite hard sometimes to provide that sort of substance to it, and especially within 30 minutes. So yeah, hopefully I've raised some of the awareness of it. But as you say, the identity realm is so pervasive in both good and bad ways. Good when you get it right, bad when you don't. That yeah, it features so highly with that discovery, and once you've got the discovery part done, then you can start moving into what you can do about it and improve those verticals in each way.
Okay, Chris, Harry, anything to add from the questions, or should we just continue and dive on in?
I think just in the interest of time, Mick, we'll just continue on.
Okay, well, here we go. Within Micro Focus, we, as I touched on very, very early on in this seminar, we are a very, very large pure play software provider. We have over 350 distinct products in the marketplace that we are actively working with at any given point in time. That's a huge area to provide a micro focus onto. So what we've done is we've tried to focus in a series of our products into addressing this very, very real and very intimidating cyber threat. So we try to give you the tools to allow you to protect your infrastructure, to protect your users, to protect the estate, to be able to detect those outliers, the anomalies, the vulnerabilities that might exist within the infrastructure, and then do something about it, to be able to evolve and increase your security posture throughout that life cycle. And this is not a one and done exercise. The threats are always changing. Your infrastructure is always on the move. And let's not forget the transient nature of student accounts and how they come and go, they ebb and flow. People forget passwords and people change roles within the academic space. For one moment, you're an undergrad, then you're a postgrad. You could be a visiting professor or a lecturer, or hell, even contracting into the organization. All of these things need to be considered. So there's a lot of moving parts to consider. Can you move on for me, please, Simon? So what we've done about this is we've taken Micro Focus and we've looked at the world of cyber resilience and given a go-to-market where we logically group cyber resilience into cyber res. This is a go-to-market. It's what you'll see on the t-shirt, and this is what we're driving forward into the space. And cyber resilience, or cyber res within Micro Focus, is focused on 5 key areas of delivery. Then we have ArcSight, which is our security incident and endpoint management system. We have Fortify for application security, whether that be static or dynamic runtime application testing, checking the vulnerabilities prior to compilation or while they're out there in the wild. We know a lot of you have homegrown applications that have evolved to meet your requirements over the years. Have you checked them for vulnerabilities? We have Interset in there, our machine learning, and our entity and user behavioral analytics components that permeate through every one of our elements of cyber res. It stands alone as its own data science application, but is integral into everything we do. So it looks at what is normal within your environment. What does a normal baseline look like? Look at the anomalies, look at the detections of anything that looks slightly out of kilter. To the points you made earlier, somebody is now logging in after 3:30 on a Friday. That in itself might be unusual for some of your installations, but if the user has never done this for the past 15 years, that should raise a really, really big red flag. If you've got a SIM solution like ArcSight and you're digesting hundreds of thousands of events per second, what we need to be able to do is zero in on those events that need to be investigated. We need your SOC operators to be able to be put to good use and find those things that need to be investigated. Rather than burning through tens of thousands of events, let them zero in on the ones that are important. Those events could be used to influence things in that next area, the net IQ part. I've already talked about the risk service and risk elements in earlier sessions, looking for those behavioral outliers, things that are unusual or that really should have an impact into the way in which we manage users, identities, entitlements, and access rights. If something is appropriate when the lights are green and everyone's happy, doesn't necessarily mean those same rules should be applied when we're under attack, or when there's been a known vulnerability detected, or when an intrusion attempt has been identified. So again, taking that element of risk through a behavioral analytics view and a lens helps to crystallize that. We also have voltage in there for data encryption, protecting data at rest and in transit. Voltage gives us format preserving encryption. So if you still want to perform analytics on data, it's not a case of taking a very, very small piece of data, developing a hash and making it unusable. We can actually still work with the data in its anonymized or encrypted format. Could you move on for me, please, Simon? So what I've done here is I've taken that NIST framework that we've color-coded and used elsewhere, and I've wrapped it into a circle. So we do have the identify, the protect, the detect, the respond and recover stages, beautifully explained earlier. And I've just tried to make it more of a cyclical approach. And what I want to do is try and show where some of these elements play. You've got the detection capabilities. What happens when there's an endpoint detection? Look at an intrusion event. Look at something that's alerting our sensors within the system. That's where ArcSight comes to play, but also being able to respond. By closing that time from detection to response and making that window of opportunity as small as possible, we can limit damage. A lot of intrusion isn't detected for a considerable amount of time as either rogue accounts or opened ports are left undetected for weeks or months at a time. Well, by using the SIM solution, we can identify that, quickly lock it down. You've seen Fortify coming in here. So verifying that your applications across your estate, whether you wrote them or you've had contractors to develop them, or even students have created software that is part of your infrastructure now because it's so smart. Does it still meet the coding standards of today? Back when I was at university, a lot of this was hand coded from scratch. Nowadays, we're importing libraries. You've all seen the Log4j vulnerabilities that caused chaos before Christmas, and the permeation of effects that that's had throughout the industry. Because we're reusing code, we're importing libraries and plugging things in, the code development times are greatly reduced. But how can we be sure that each of these elements we're incorporating in the code are safe? And by using Fortify, we can build in good, strong coding practices and stop introducing a lot of these vulnerabilities at points of source. Interset has already been mentioned. As I say, it's ubiquitous across the portfolio, but certainly in terms of identifying anomalous behavior, where that comes into the identify stages, looking at what is important, what drags our attention into the forefront, what do we need to consider, and where do we put our efforts, as well as being able to augment our SIM solution. Interset has a wide play. Beyond that, we have voltage for protecting our data at rest and in transit, as well as being able to recover. If the data is encrypted, the recovery of that process is far easier than data that's exposed or easily compromised. But just look at how often NetIQ appears within this NIST cycle, from being able to identify the sources and the accounts and the exposure that you could have, through to protecting the resources by implementing zero trust type capabilities, assigning rights and controls and limitations to your accounts, and only provisioning access as requested when appropriate, in line with your governance controls, and when necessary, escalating through privilege management. If you're accessing a server to perform maintenance, let's restrict which commands you can actually utilize. Any commands that fall beyond that, we could automatically terminate a user's session. Let's turn on keystroke logging, see where the user's clicking, take periodic screen captures of whatever's happening within that PAM session, whether we're checking out like a root type account or an administrator account behind the scenes and not showing the user what they're doing, or whether we're elevating their account in real time. PAM will deliver that, including real-time video recording and session over-the-shoulder monitoring and remote kill capabilities of any sessions that are running. Access management, privilege, delegation, all of these elements fall into that protection stage. If you look at the response, being able to very, very quickly, using event-driven controls, something has happened, I'm going to lock down systems, I'm going to revoke access, I'm going to suspend an account, I'm going to freeze an element or even disable an area for any further interactions, I'm going to stop a driver from doing anything, therefore I'm not going to permeate any changes further in my network zone. All the way through to the recovery. I've said we have delegation and management control systems in place here. If you've been compromised, your AD accounts have been changed or policies have been updated, whether that be on Windows, Linux, or any other endpoints out there, we can use things like Change Guardian to monitor that change, to identify the change, to see what it changed from, what it changed to, who made that change, when it was made, where it was made, and then if it's not right, we'll reinstate it. The same is true over user rights within the system. If we've got policies saying that M. Rutherford, this contractor coming onto the site, usually has this level of access, and I get in there and manage to uplift my account, Identity Manager will automatically reset that to a good known baseline. Okay. Same is also true over directory and resource administration, universal policy. We have the controls in place to assist you. So really what I would like to finish on is, yes, it's a worrying state of affairs that we're in at the moment. I work within the NetIQ space, but I'm part of a larger part of Micro Focus that deals with cyber resilience. So I've looked for the Cyber Res logo, and I'm very happy to bring some of my peers in to meet with you all if you need to address any of the particular points raised today within these sessions. But I still maintain that identity is a cornerstone. Thank you very much for your time. Back to you, Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Mick. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, the way in which the cyber threats are evolving, they are coming up in far greater regularity. We see various different persistent threats emerging, whether that's through state-sponsored cyber attacks or just opportunistic issues that are going through from a digitalization and technology opportunity. So yeah, the threats are rising, but that doesn't mean to say that everybody should just be sticking their head in the sand and trying their hardest to forget about it. Taking positive actions, whether that's through technology or whether that's through just advisory services and an appreciation of what can be done, you'll very, very quickly improve your defenses. We do see an exponential improvement in maturity once the problem is recognized. And more often than not, the problem is recognized at the lower levels, but isn't getting backed up with senior stakeholder. But that's changing too. We're seeing it being a conversation topic at board level. And we're also seeing that that's more often than not backed up with cash as well. So the investment to actually put these things right is starting to change. It used to be that the CISO's job was the most exciting job in the world, but the most frustrating job in the world, because you see all of the problems and you get no budget to do anything about it. But that's changing too. So people are now starting to recognize that there needs to be improvements. And yeah, if you're looking for help and support as to where to make that investment and what you need to do about it, then certainly with the combination of Turnkey underwritten with Micro Focus technology, then you're absolutely in a good place.
Perfect. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Mick. And I think just in summary, that identity really is key to the infrastructure, both in cyber security world and just IT in general. So I see that we're just running slightly over, so we'll answer any questions after the session. But just to say thanks, Mick, thanks, Simon, and thanks everyone for joining throughout the day. We hope you've enjoyed these sessions. As mentioned earlier, all sessions are recorded and will be available on demand. We'll also give you access to all the materials you've seen. So thanks again. We all hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.